Hey guys, tonight we are drifting back, way back to a time before GPS, before compasses, before even the simplest of maps were common. We're going to find ourselves on the grey, heaving waters of the North Atlantic, surrounded by fog so thick you can practically chew on it. You're on a Viking longship, and your destination is a smudge of land hundreds of miles away that you've only heard about in stories. The only thing guiding you is the wisdom of the grey-bearded man at the steering oar, the feel of the swell beneath the hull, and perhaps a mysterious, magical-looking crystal tucked away in a leather pouch. Let's be honest, given the lack of waterproof clothing and the distinctly un-gourmet menu of dried fish and hard bread, you probably wouldn't survive the journey. But tonight you don't have to, you just have to relax. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always fun to see where everyone is listening from, so feel free to drop your city or country and the local time in the comments. It's a quiet way of knowing we're all in this together, drifting off. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken not all at once, but in slow, aching stages. The first thing you become aware of is the cold. It's a damp, profound cold that has seeped through your wool cloak, through your tunic, and settled deep into your bones. It's the kind of cold that feels ancient and unforgiving. The second thing you notice is the motion. A constant rhythmic rocking, a long, slow lift, and a gentle stomach-lurching drop that has become the background beat of your life for weeks. You're lying on a wooden chest, your personal sea chest, that holds everything you own, and the hard oak digs into your hip with every sway of the ship. The air smells of three things: the sharp, clean sting of salt, the heavy, almost medicinal scent of pine tar used to waterproof the hull, and the less than pleasant aroma of 30 unwashed men who have been at sea for a very long time. There's no escaping it. It's the perfume of the Viking age. You crack open an eyelid. The world is a uniform, milky grey. Fog, thick and wet, clings to everything, muffling sound and swallowing the horizon. It drips from the single vast woolen sail that hangs limp from the central mast, each drop landing with a soft pat on the wooden deck. You can't see the bow of the ship, and you can barely make out the stern, where a silent figure stands, one hand resting on the long steering oar. This is your world now, a 50-foot-long, clinker-built vessel, a sliver of wood and iron adrift in an endless grey void. You run a hand along the planks beside you, feeling the clever overlapping design. Each plank is riveted to the one below it, a technique that gives the longship its legendary flexibility, allowing it to bend and twist with the waves rather than fight against them. It feels less like a boat and more like a living creature, its wooden ribs groaning and creaking with each breath the ocean takes. It's a masterpiece of engineering, but right now it feels like a very small, very fragile cradle on a very big, very indifferent ocean. A few other men are stirring. They are shapes in the mist, bearded and wrapped in thick cloaks, their faces weathered by sun and salt. There is no chatter. No cheerful morning greetings, just the quiet, efficient movements of men who know their tasks. One is checking the rigging, his hands moving with practiced ease over the thick, tarred ropes. Another is bailing water from the bilge with a wooden bucket, the slosh of the water a familiar rhythmic sound. You watch them, feeling like an imposter. You are not a raider, not a warrior. You're just here, along for the ride, trying to stay out of the way and not look as terrified as you feel. Your contribution so far has been limited to shivering and trying to keep down the morning's meal of cold, greasy porridge. A true Viking hero in the making. You sit up, pulling your cloak tighter. The wool is heavy and damp, and it smells faintly of sheep and wood smoke. Looking up at the sail, you can see the deep red and white stripes, their colors muted by the fog. It's a work of art in its own right, woven from the wool of hundreds of sheep, and then painstakingly treated with a mixture of lanolin, the natural grease from the wool, and tallow or animal fat. This greasy coating helps the sail shed water and resist the rot that would otherwise consume it in this perpetually damp environment. It also adds its own unique note to the ship's olfactory symphony, a slightly rancid, waxy smell that clings to the back of your throat. It's an ingenious piece of textile technology, but it offers no help when there is no wind to fill it. The ship is just drifting. The silence is what's most unnerving. Without the wind, the usual creaks and groans of the ship are softer, more intimate. You can hear the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull, the drip of condensation, the soft scuff of a leather boot on wood. It feels like the world is holding its breath. Where are you? No one seems to know. Or if they do, they're not saying. The skipper. A man named Bjorn, whose face is a roadmap of scars and squint lines, stands unmoving at the stern, staring out into the nothingness as if he can see right through it. His calmness is a stark contrast to the nervous energy thrumming just beneath your own skin. Historians still argue whether a ship this size would have 30 men or as many as 60, depending on its purpose, a trading vessel or a warship. Right now, with 30 souls on board, it feels both impossibly crowded and terrifyingly empty. Crowded because there's nowhere to go for a moment's peace, no private cabin, not even a corner to call your own. Empty because beyond the wooden rail is an immensity of grey water that could swallow you all without a trace. You look at the other men's faces, searching for a flicker of the same fear you feel, but you find nothing. Only a placid, almost boring acceptance of the situation. This is their life. This fog, this uncertainty. It's just another Tuesday at the office for them. For you, it's a waking nightmare, a slow-motion catastrophe waiting to happen. How can they possibly know where to go from here? The change happens so gradually you almost miss it. At first, it's just a subtle brightening of the grey, a shift from slate to silver. Then you begin to notice thin patches, little windows in the fog, where the air seems less heavy. A collective sigh of relief seems to pass through the crew, though no one says a word. Oars which had been resting are taken up. Not for propulsion, not yet, but in readiness. The air grows warmer by a degree, the damp chill from Section 1 losing some of its bite. And then, like a curtain being slowly drawn aside, a vast swathe of fog shears away, and you see it. Land. Your breath catches in your throat. It's a rugged, intimidating coastline, a line of dark, jagged cliffs rising from a churning sea, their tops still wreathed in ribbons of mist. Pine trees, stunted and bent by the wind, cling to the rock wherever they can find a foothold. A sliver of pale, watery sunlight breaks through the clouds, glinting off a distant waterfall that spills from the clifftop directly into the sea. It's beautiful and it's terrifying, and it's the most welcome sight you have ever seen. The ship comes alive. Bjorn the skipper doesn't shout orders. He doesn't need to. He gives a quiet command, and the men dip their oars into the water, not to row towards the land, but to keep the ship a safe and steady distance from it. They begin to move parallel to the coast, following its every twist and turn. You are witnessing the most fundamental, the most ancient form of navigation pilotage, or as these men would think of it simply, knowing the way. You watch Bjorn as he studies the coastline, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He isn't just looking at it, he's reading it. He's reading it like a map he has memorized over a lifetime of voyages. He points a leather-gloved finger towards a peculiar rock formation, a tall, lonely pillar of stone that stands apart from the cliff-face seabirds circling its peak. Hafkarl, he grunts, giving it a name. The Old Man. A young boy no older than 15 who is new to this route nods and stares, committing the shape to memory. This is his lesson. This is his classroom. This is how knowledge is passed on. Not in books, not on charts, but in stories and direct observation. The Vikings had a concept called the lead, the route. A lead wasn't a line on a map. It was a set of verbal instructions, a story you told yourself to get from one place to another. It would sound something like, sail from Hordaland with the afternoon sun on your left shoulder. Follow the coast until you see the 3 islands that look like sleeping whales. Pass them on the seaward side, then steer towards the great cliff with the waterfall. From there, you will need to row for half a day across the mouth of the fjord. It was a mental tapestry woven from landmarks, sailing times, and the position of the sun. It required an incredible memory and a deep, intimate knowledge of the natural world. It makes your reliance on a cheerful voice from your phone telling you to turn left in 200 feet feel, well, a little pathetic. You continue to glide along the coast, the rhythm of the oars, a steady, comforting heartbeat. Every feature of the land is a potential signpost. The color of the rock, the type of vegetation, the way the waves break against a submerged reef, it all means something to these men. At one point, a sailor at the bow casually tosses a lead weight overboard. It's attached to a long line, and you watch as he lets it run through his fingers until he feels it hit the bottom. He hauls it back up hand over hand, water streaming from the rope. When it emerges, he doesn't look at the depth markings on the line. Instead, he inspects the bottom of the weight, which you now see is hollowed out and filled with a thick, greasy substance, tallow. He sniffs it, then rubs a bit between his thumb and forefinger. Sand and crushed shell, he calls back to Bjorn, who simply nods. You realize what they're doing. They're sampling the seabed. In a place where the cliffs all start to look the same, knowing whether the bottom is mud, sand, or rock can tell you if you're in the right shallow bay or a dangerously rocky one. It's brilliantly simple, a low-tech sonar that relies on touch and smell. For the next few hours, this is your life. The ship becomes a quiet observer of the land. The sun, a little stronger, now warms your back. The fear you felt in the fog has been replaced by a quiet sense of awe. This isn't the chaotic, brutish world you might have imagined. It's a world of immense skill, of quiet competence, of knowledge earned through countless generations of trial and error. But you also start to notice the limitations of this method. It's slow, and it only works as long as you have a coast to follow. What happens when the lead instructs you to leave the land behind? What happens when your destination is an island like Iceland or Greenland that you can't see from the shore? Historians still argue whether the average Viking trader intentionally sailed out of sight of land for long periods, or if they tried to remain within a day's journey of the coast whenever possible. The sagas are full of heroic journeys across the open ocean, but the reality for most was likely a series of shorter hops, a cautious game of connect the dots with the shoreline. To leave the comforting, solid line of the coast behind required a different kind of courage and a different kind of toolset altogether. As the afternoon wears on, you see Bjorn looking not at the cliffs beside you, but out to the west towards the vast, empty expanse of the open sea. He's watching the sun, gauging its height. A decision is being made. Soon the safety of the shoreline will have to be abandoned. Soon the true test of their skill will begin. and you can feel that old familiar knot of anxiety begin to tighten in your stomach once again. The moment comes with no ceremony. Bjorn gives a quiet order, just 2 words in his gravelly Norse tongue. The steering oar is angled, and the bow of the longship, which has been dutifully pointing along the coastline, swings slowly, deliberately to the west, towards the empty horizon. The land doesn't vanish instantly. For an hour, then 2, it remains a dark, reassuring line on your left, a constant reminder that solid ground is not so far away. But it shrinks. The tall cliffs from Section 2 become low hills, then a faint, smudged silhouette, and then nothing. The sea swallows it, and you are truly alone. The water has changed too. Near the coast it was a churning, choppy green. Out here it is a deep, mesmerizing blue-black with long, rolling swells that lift the entire 50-foot ship as if it were a child's toy. The world is now only 3 things: the wood of the ship beneath you, the endless water around you, and the vast open bowl of the sky above. The crew's focus shifts. Before, all eyes were on the land. Now they are on the sky. You watch as Bjorn, his eyes shielded against the afternoon glare, scans the horizon, his gaze not on the water, but above it. He's looking for birds. You'd noticed the gulls and terns near the coast, of course, but you hadn't paid them much mind. Your modern brain is trained to filter them out as background noise, like pigeons in a city park. Here, though, they are not noise, they are data. They are living, breathing signposts. You see a small flock of birds flying low and fast over the water, their direction purposeful. They are not circling or gliding, they are going somewhere. Bjorn watches them until they are specks, noting their trajectory with a slight nod. He is practicing a form of navigation so old it borders on instinct. He knows that certain species of seabirds like guillemots and gannets spend their days fishing far out at sea, but they must return to their coastal nests to roost at night. In the morning, their flight path tells you the direction away from land. In the evening, it provides a perfect feathered arrow pointing the way home. This isn't just folklore. It's a well-documented technique. One of the most famous tales from the sagas is that of a Norwegian navigator named Floki Vilgerdarson. He was one of the first to intentionally sail for Iceland, and he did it with the help of a few feathered assistants. The story goes that he took 3 ravens with him on his journey. After sailing for a time, he released the first raven. It flew high into the air, circled the ship, and then flew straight back to the Faroe Islands, the land they had last departed from. Floki knew then that they were closer to their starting point than to any new land. He sailed on. Later, he released the second raven. This one also flew high, circled a few times, and then landed back on the ship's mast, refusing to go anywhere. This told Floki that there was no land within its sight in any direction. Still, he sailed on. Finally, after more days at sea, he released the third raven. This one flew high, found its bearings, and then flew purposefully to the northwest. Floki, trusting the bird's instinct to find a place to rest, simply steered his ship in the same direction. He followed that raven all the way to the coast of a vast new island, which we now know as Iceland. In honor of his method, he became known forever after as Hrafna Floki, which means Raven Floki. You look around your own ship. There's no cage of ravens here, but the principle is the same. The men all seem to have an innate understanding of the sky. They can distinguish different birds from a shocking distance. They know a puffin from a razorbill by its silhouette and flight pattern. This knowledge is crucial, as an experienced sailor would know the effective range of each bird. Seeing a puffin, for instance, is a good sign that land is relatively close, as they tend to stay nearer to their breeding colonies. Seeing a fulmar, on the other hand, is less helpful, as they are true ocean wanderers and can be found hundreds of miles from the nearest shore. It's a biological map, a mental field guide that tells them not just direction, but also proximity. It's utterly brilliant, and it makes you feel like a child in the woods, unable to read the simplest of signs. Still, as you watch a distant flock of gannets dive-bombing the water, you can't help but see the system's flaws. What if the birds are just following a school of fish that leads you in the wrong direction? What if you misidentify the species? And what happens on a grey, overcast day when the birds are hunkered down, or at night when you can't see them at all? Historians still argue whether this bird-finding method was a primary navigational tool for long voyages, or more of a desperate last resort when other methods had failed. Was it a reliable system for plotting a course to a specific harbour, or just a way to find the nearest any-which-way patch of dirt in an emergency? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. It was another tool in a diverse and sophisticated mental toolkit. It wouldn't get you across the entire Atlantic, but it could certainly save your life if you were lost within 100 miles of shore. For now, as the sun begins its slow descent, you watch the sky with a new appreciation, seeing not just birds, but a network of tiny feathered pilots, each one a potential guide in this vast and intimidating wilderness of water. The ship sails on, following their invisible roads in the sky. The day after you leave the coast is the complete opposite of the day you awoke in the fog. The sky is a brilliant high blue swept clean of clouds. The sun is a warm, reassuring presence on your face. The deep blue-black water sparkles, and a steady wind has appeared, filling the great woolen sail and pulling the ship forward with a quiet, determined force. The rhythmic slap of waves against the hull and the taut creak of the rigging are the only sounds. The anxiety of the open ocean is still there, a low hum in the back of your mind, but it's overshadowed by a sense of progress, of purpose. Unlike the unsettling drift of the foggy morning today, you are going somewhere. But how do you maintain a straight line in a world with no roads? You look to Bjorn, and you find him as always looking to the sky. Today, his guide is the sun. This is navigation at its most elemental. You don't need any special tools to know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. For a journey heading due west, like a trip from Norway to Iceland, the task is deceptively simple. Keep the ship pointed towards the setting sun, but most journeys aren't that straightforward. You're heading northwest, so you watch and you learn. In the morning, the sun is kept off the port bow, the front left of the ship. As the day progresses and the sun arcs higher, the angle of the ship is adjusted so the sun is now directly off the port side. By late afternoon, it's off the port quarter, the back left. The sun becomes the hand of a giant celestial clock, and the ship itself is the dial. The crew maintains their bearing by ensuring the sunlight and shadows on deck fall in the same place at the same time day after day. It is a constant, subtle dance between the helmsman and the heavens. The Vikings had a formal system for this, a way of dividing the horizon and the day. They called it the Eikt system. They divided the horizon into 8 primary directions, or etia. Northeast, south and west were the main ones, of course, but they also had names for the points in between northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest. As the sun moved through the sky, it passed through these segments, and its position marked a specific time of day, an eiktarstada. For a farmer on land, these positions might be marked by a mountain peak or a specific rock. For a sailor, the landmarks were the ship itself, the bow, the stern, the starboard rail. So a command might not be sail northwest, but rather keep the mid-afternoon sun directly abeam. It was an intuitive system. one that integrated time and direction into a single, seamless concept. It's the kind of deep, embodied knowledge that comes from a lifetime of observation, not from reading a manual. It's like they have a compass built right into their brains, one that is calibrated daily by the rising sun. On a small clear patch of decking near the mast, you notice one of the older sailors tending to a simple yet ingenious device. It's a flat wooden disc with a small wooden peg or gnomon sticking up from its center. A sun shadow board. Earlier in the morning, he had placed it in the sun and begun to mark the tip of the peg's shadow with tiny chalk marks at regular intervals. Now, as midday approaches, a clear curve of dots traces the shadow's path. You watch fascinated as the shadow shrinks, getting shorter and shorter as the sun climbs to its zenith. The sailor waits, patient as a stone. Then for a few moments the shadow stops shrinking and begins ever so slowly to lengthen again. At the point of its shortest length, he makes a deep, confident scratch in the wood. That scratch marks the exact moment of local noon. A line drawn from the center peg through that scratch points directly, unerringly, to true geographic south. And from that one line, he can accurately mark out northeast and west on his board. He now has a temporary homemade compass rose that is perfectly accurate for this day in this location. It's a quiet moment of scientific precision in an otherwise rough and ready world. With this knowledge, they can do more than just hold a bearing. They can attempt to sail along a specific line of latitude. If their destination is directly west, they know that each day the sun at noon should reach the exact same maximum height in the sky. They could measure this altitude simply by sight, marking on the mast where the sun's reflection sits at noon. Or they might measure the length of the noon shadow on their sun shadow board. If the shadow one day is shorter than the day before, they know they have drifted north. If it's longer, they have drifted south. They can then correct their course accordingly. Historians still argue whether Vikings could only hold a rough latitude, or if they possessed methods, perhaps using a marked stick or their own hands held at arm's length, to measure the sun's midday altitude with surprising precision. We have no definitive manuals telling us their secrets. But looking at the quiet confidence of the sailor with his wooden disc, it's easy to believe they were far more sophisticated than they are often given credit for. The sun is no longer just a source of light and warmth. It is a clock, a calendar, and a compass all rolled into one. But as you look at it, a thought occurs to you, the same thought that is always in the back of every sailor's mind. This is all wonderful as long as you can see it, as long as you can. What do you do when the sky turns grey once more? It starts as a high, thin haze, a milky film that veils the brilliant blue sky you enjoyed yesterday. The sun, your steadfast guide from Section 4, is no longer a sharp, brilliant disk, but a softer, fuzzier ball of light, its edges blurred. The air grows heavy. The steady wind that filled the sail begins to falter, coming in inconsistent puffs. An unspoken tension ripples through the crew. They've seen this before. They know what it means. The confident chatter dies down, replaced by a watchful silence. The men secure loose ropes, check the coverings on their cargo, and pull their woolen cloaks a little tighter. They are preparing not for a storm, but for something far more insidious, the loss of the world. By midday, the sky is no longer blue, but a seamless, featureless sheet of pale grey. The sun is just a slightly brighter patch in that grey, a vague suggestion of light with no discernible location. The sun shadow board, your symbol of celestial certainty, is now just a useless piece of wood, its gnomon casting no shadow at all. Then the fog rolls in. It doesn't rush in like a storm front. It seeps in, rising from the surface of the water itself in ghostly tendrils. It wraps itself around the ship, cocooning you once again in that same damp, silent grey world you awoke to in Section 1. But this is different. This is worse. Back then, you were close to the coast with the hope of land nearby. Out here in the middle of the North Atlantic, the fog is an enemy. It erases everything. The horizon vanishes. The rolling swells of the deep ocean become invisible, and you can only feel them as the ship rises and falls beneath you. The wind dies completely. The great sail is lowered and bundled against the mast as it is now nothing but dead weight. The oars are useless against the deep ocean currents. You are no longer sailing. You are adrift, inert. A speck of wood and wool and humanity suspended in an infinite grey limbo. This state has a name in the Old Norse language. Hafvilla. It means quite literally, sea bewildered. It is the condition of being utterly and hopelessly lost at sea. No sun, no stars, no landmarks, no birds. No idea which way is north, south, east, or west. No idea how far you have drifted from your intended course. It is the single greatest fear of the Viking sailor. Storms are violent and terrifying, but they are events with a beginning and an end. Hafvilla is a state of being. It is a quiet, creeping dread that seeps into your soul. You can drift for days, even weeks, in this condition. Your precious supply of fresh water stored in wooden casks begins to dwindle. The dried fish and hard bread, already monotonous, become strictly rationed. The cold feels more intense, the dampness more penetrating. Hope begins to fray at the edges. You look at the crew, trying to gauge their mood. The calm acceptance you saw before has been replaced by a quiet, stoic resignation. They sit on their sea chests, conserving energy. Some mend leather straps or sharpen their knives, their movements slow and economical. They are waiting. There is nothing else to do. They might try to read the swell, the long, low-energy waves that travel for thousands of miles across the ocean, independent of the local wind. An experienced sailor like Bjorn might be able to feel the direction of the primary swell and guess at a general bearing. But in a confused sea with waves coming from multiple directions, it's little more than a guess. A desperate attempt to impose order on chaos. The reality is, they are blind. They have lost their connection to the world. Historians still argue whether becoming Hafvilla was a rare catastrophic event or a relatively common, albeit dangerous, part of any long-distance sea voyage. The sagas are filled with stories of ships being blown off course and lost for entire seasons, their crews eventually washing ashore starved and half-mad on some unknown land. It's likely that for every successful voyage from Norway to Iceland, there were others that simply vanished. Lost to the fog, lost to the currents, their crews succumbing to thirst or starvation, their ships eventually breaking apart in a storm never to be seen again. This possibility hangs in the air now, thick and suffocating as the fog itself. Every creak of the ship sounds ominous. Every cold drip of water that lands on your face feels like a harbinger of doom. You are no longer on an adventure. You are a survivor, adrift on a hostile ocean, and the odds are slowly, inexorably stacking against you. The men are silent, but in their eyes you see the quiet calculation. How many days of water are left? How many days until the weather breaks? How many days until the hope runs out completely? It is in this moment of absolute blindness, of profound uncertainty, that a man next to you whispers a single word, a word of legend. Solarstein, the sunstone. The word hangs in the damp, cold air, almost visible. Solarstein. You don't know what it means, but you understand the tone. It wasn't a shout of panic or a cry for help. It was a whisper of profound, almost sacred hope. It was the sound of a final card being played. All eyes turn from the impenetrable grey fog to the one man who seems immune to the despair that has settled over the ship, Bjorn. He has been standing motionless at the stern, a stoic statue, his gaze lost in the mists. But now he stirs. He moves with a slow, deliberate grace, as if beginning a ritual he has performed 100 times before. He doesn't acknowledge the whispered word or the hopeful stares of his crew. His focus is entirely inward. You watch holding your breath as he reaches inside his thick wool tunic. He fumbles for a moment and then his hand emerges, holding a small, unassuming object. It's a leather pouch no bigger than your palm. The leather is dark with age and sea salt worn smooth in some places and cracked in others. It is held shut by a simple leather thong wrapped tightly around its neck. There's no fanfare, no dramatic unveiling. Bjorn simply unwinds the thong with his thick, calloused fingers. The crew leans in a subtle collective shift of weight. The silence on the ship deepens until the only sound is the gentle, almost imperceptible lap of the water against the hull. He tips the pouch and into his waiting palm slides a stone. And your first thought is, that's it. It's not a glowing gem from a fantasy tale. It's not a perfectly cut crystal ball. It's a small, translucent, somewhat milky-looking rhomboid of a mineral about the size of a small block of soap. It looks ordinary, almost disappointingly so. It has a slightly greasy luster to it, and it feels like it would be cool and heavy in your hand. And yet the way Bjorn holds it, cradled gently, his thumb rubbing its smooth surface, tells you it is anything but ordinary. This is the object of their hope. This is the Solarstein. This stone is the stuff of legend, an object that lives in the hazy borderlands between history and myth. For centuries, its existence was known to modern scholars only through a few cryptic passages in the Old Norse sagas. One of the most famous comes from the saga of King Olaf the Holy. As the story goes, King Olaf was visiting a chieftain on a snowy, overcast day. The sun was completely hidden. The king, wanting to test the chieftain's wisdom, asked him if he could tell the time. The chieftain made a guess, but Olaf was not satisfied. He wanted proof. The saga says, the king made them fetch the sunstone. He held it up and saw where light radiated from the stone, and thus directed a ray, and so he verified the chieftain's guess. For a long time that was it. A strange little story. A king holding up a stone that somehow pointed to a sun no one could see. It sounds like magic. It sounds like a fairy tale. Another even stranger story from a text called Raudulf's Thatcher describes a magical stone that was kept in a monastery and could not only show the position of the sun day or night, regardless of the weather, but could also show the movements of the moon and stars. This one was clearly a work of fantasy, a story of a heavenly artifact rather than a practical tool. And so, for many years, that's how the sunstone was treated by academics. Historians and archaeologists dismissed it. It was folklore, a poetic metaphor, a symbol of a king's divine wisdom perhaps, but not a real functional object. How could a simple stone find a sun hidden behind a thick blanket of cloud and fog? It defied logic. It defied the known laws of physics. It was relegated to the same category as magic swords and talking animals. But the men on this ship don't think it's a myth. The quiet reverence with which they watch Bjorn tells you they have seen this magic work before. Their faith is absolute. And as you sit there adrift and lost in the middle of a cold grey nowhere, you find yourself wanting to believe too. You are witnessing a moment that scholars have debated for generations. Historians and physicists have long argued about whether the sunstone of the sagas was a real functional navigational tool or merely a piece of poetic folklore. Was the story of King Olaf an embellished account of a real scientific principle or just a good yarn? The lack of definitive archaeological proof, no skeleton has ever been found clutching a crystal with a label saying Viking Sunstone User Manual inside, has kept the debate alive. But here on this deck, in this moment of quiet desperation, the academic debate feels 1,000 miles away. All that matters is Bjorn and the milky, unimpressive-looking stone he now holds up to the brightest part of the grey, featureless sky. He closes one eye, his face a mask of intense concentration. The performance is about to begin. Bjorn holds the milky crystal up against the brightest part of the uniformly grey sky. With his other hand, he creates a small patch of shadow over the stone, shielding it from the overwhelming ambient glare. He squints, looking not at the stone, but through it, as if it were a lens. You edge closer, trying to see what he sees. He begins to rotate the stone with excruciating slowness, his thumb and forefinger turning it on its central axis. The movement is so steady, so practiced, it's almost meditative. At first you see nothing. It's just a translucent stone against a grey background. But as Bjorn gestures for you to look closer to align your eye with his, you start to notice something strange. Inside the crystal, the light seems to split. You can see a faint, blurry dot or line inside the stone, and as he rotates it, a second identical dot appears alongside it. It's like looking through a drunkard's spectacles. He continues the slow, patient rotation. The two dots inside the crystal shift in brightness. First one is brighter, then the other. The crew is silent, their collective gaze locked on that tiny, slow-motion ballet of light. Then, for a fleeting instant, something happens. As the crystal reaches a precise angle, the two dots merge into one. Or perhaps in another type of crystal, they suddenly achieve a perfect, equal brightness. It's a subtle, almost imperceptible change, but to Bjorn, it is the roar of a trumpet. He freezes. His hand is rock steady. The stone is now perfectly aligned. He holds it there for a moment, then, without looking away from the crystal, he raises his other arm and points a resolute finger at a completely unremarkable patch of the grey overhead. There, he says, his voice a low rumble that cuts through the silence. The sun is there. A quiet murmur of approval ripples through the men. The spell of the Hafvilla is broken. They are no longer blind. What you have just witnessed is not magic, but a beautiful piece of applied physics. The seemingly magical power of the sunstone comes from a property of light called polarization. Sunlight travels in waves, and these waves normally vibrate in all directions. However, when sunlight enters Earth's atmosphere, it scatters off air molecules. This scattering process organizes the light, forcing it to vibrate in a specific direction relative to the sun. This is polarized light. Even on a completely overcast day when the sun's disk is totally obscured, these invisible patterns of polarized light are still present in the sky, forming vast concentric rings around the sun's hidden position. You can't see them with the naked eye, but the sunstone can. Certain types of crystal have a property called birefringence, or double refraction. When unpolarized light enters them, it's split into two separate rays. This is why you saw the two blurry dots inside the stone. By rotating the crystal, Bjorn was essentially using it as a filter, searching for the one angle where the polarized light from the sky was perfectly aligned with the crystal's internal structure. At that point, the two rays, the two dots, looked identical. Finding that angle of maximum polarization is like finding a giant invisible arrow in the sky that points directly back to its source, the sun. It's the same principle used in modern polarized sunglasses, which have a special filter that blocks the horizontally polarized glare bouncing off water or a road. If you've ever tilted your head while wearing them and looking at your phone screen, you've seen the screen get darker or lighter. You were performing the exact same action as Bjorn, just with a different purpose. Interestingly, there's a phenomenon known as hiding as brush, a very faint yellowish bow-tie-shaped image that some humans can perceive in the presence of polarized light. It's a biological quirk in our eyes. It's entirely possible that some Viking navigators were naturally more sensitive to this effect, and the sunstone merely amplified an ability they already possessed, allowing them to see the unseeable. Of course, finding the sun is only the first step. Bjorn now has a single reference point. He can use it to reorient the sun shadow board from section 4, holding a stick in the direction of the hidden sun to cast a faint fuzzy shadow and re-establish a rough north-south line. The course can be corrected. The oars can be manned to pull the ship back onto its proper bearing. But the question remains, how good was it really? Scientists and historians still argue about just how accurate the sunstone really was. Experiments with modern candidate crystals have shown that under ideal overcast conditions, the sun's position can be determined to within a few degrees. But could it pinpoint the sun's location to within a single degree, making it a tool of fine precision? Or did it merely give a general direction that was good enough to turn a state of complete bewilderment into a rough but functional sense of direction? The answer probably doesn't matter to the men on this ship. Right now, good enough is a miracle. It is the difference between being lost and being found. With the sun's position known, a sense of quiet purpose returns to the ship. The men know their heading now. The deep, oppressive silence of the Hafilla is replaced by the familiar sounds of work, the rhythmic splash of oars dipping into the water to correct their course, the soft scrape of leather as the rigging is checked once more. Bjorn, his job done, carefully places the stone back into its worn leather pouch and tucks it away. The magical object has vanished, and the world is once again mundane. But your mind is still on that small, milky crystal. It worked. You saw it work. The mystery is no longer if it works, but what it is. The sagas are poetically vague, calling it only a sunstone. But what does that mean in geological terms? What rock were you just looking at? You've just witnessed the solution to a historical puzzle, and now you're left pondering the identity of the key. The leading candidate, the one most scientists and historians currently favor, is a mineral called Iceland spar. It's a remarkably pure and transparent variety of calcite. If you were to hold a piece, the first thing you'd notice is its shape. It naturally cleaves into almost perfect rhomboids like a skewed cube, just like the one Bjorn seemed to be holding. Its defining characteristic is its extremely strong double refraction or birefringence. This is the property that created the two distinct dots you saw in section 7. When you look through it, a single object appears as two. It's not a subtle effect. It's pronounced and clear, making it an excellent tool for seeing the polarization of light. Furthermore, as its name suggests, large, high-quality deposits of Iceland spar are found in Iceland and other parts of Scandinavia. The Vikings would have had ready access to it. It was a local resource, a common if unusually clear rock from their own backyard. For a long time, this was just a strong theory. The missing piece was archaeology. No sunstone had ever been found in a Viking grave or a sunken longship. But in 2002, a discovery was made that electrified the historical community. Archaeologists excavating the wreck of the Alderney, an English ship that sank near the Channel Islands in 1592, found a cloudy, white, rhomboid-shaped crystal alongside a set of navigational dividers. It was a large, pure piece of Iceland spar. Now, 1592 is well after the Viking Age, but this was a ship from the age of exploration equipped with magnetic compasses. The presence of the Iceland spar proved that even after the invention of the compass, experienced sailors in the North Atlantic still kept one of these crystals on board as a navigational tool, most likely to check and calibrate their magnetic compasses, which were notoriously unreliable. It was the first concrete archaeological proof that Iceland's spar was used for navigation at sea, and it made the case for it being the Viking sunstone incredibly compelling. But Iceland's spar isn't the only contender. Another fascinating possibility is a mineral called cordierite. Cordierite is sometimes known by the more poetic name iolite, from the Greek for violet stone, and even more tellingly, it has been nicknamed the Viking's compass. Unlike calcite, cordierite's trick is not double refraction, but strong pleochroism. This means it appears to be different colors when viewed from different directions. If you were to hold a piece of cordierite up to the sky and rotate it, its color would shift dramatically. When looking through it away from the direction of polarization, it might seem a dull gray or yellowish. But as you rotate it into alignment with the polarized light from the sun, it would turn a deep, brilliant violet blue. The method would be just as simple: rotate the stone until you find the deepest, purest blue and you've found the direction of the sun. Like Iceland's spar, cordierite can also be found in Scandinavia, particularly Norway. There are other less likely candidates too, such as tourmaline, another pleochroic crystal that could theoretically do the same job as cordierite. The central question that still divides researchers is which of these crystals, if any, was the true sunstone of the sagas. Was it the optically clear Iceland spar, whose use is now backed by archaeological evidence from a later period, or was it the color-shifting cordierite, which bears the evocative nickname of the Viking's compass? The truth is, the sagas may not be referring to a single type of mineral. The term sunstone could have been a generic name for any crystal that exhibited these strange properties. A Viking navigator, a practical and resourceful person, likely wouldn't have cared about its precise geological classification. He would have simply called it by what it did. It found the sun. He would have used whatever worked, whatever he could trade for or find in the rocks near his home. As the ship continues to move now with a sure direction, you realize that the magic wasn't in the stone itself, but in the human ingenuity that discovered its secret. The sunstone has done its miraculous work. It has pierced the grey veil and pointed to the sun. But its job is temporary. It provides a single fleeting data point. You can't ask the skipper to stand there all day holding a crystal to the sky. The challenge now is to convert that momentary revelation into a constant, reliable heading that the helmsman can follow. The sun shadow board you saw in Section 4 is useless without a distinct shadow. You need something more advanced, a tool designed for this very situation. And so, from another leather pouch, Bjorn produces a second piece of navigational hardware. It's a wooden disc about the size of a small plate weathered and stained dark by seawater. As he passes it to you for a closer look, you see that its surface is covered in a complex pattern of etched lines. There's a hole drilled precisely in the center, and a series of straight lines radiate out from it like the spokes of a wheel. But the most prominent marking is a single, elegant, curved line that sweeps across one half of the disc like a parabolic smile. Bjorn takes a small, sharpened pin of bone and inserts it firmly into the central hole, creating a gnomon. He then holds the disc horizontally. Using the sun's position that he now knows from the sunstone, he angles his body to cast the faintest of shadows from the pin onto the disc's surface. It's a fuzzy, indistinct shadow, but it's there. The real trick is what he does next. He doesn't just find north. Instead, he carefully rotates the entire disc until the very tip of that fuzzy shadow falls exactly on the strange curved line. It takes a moment of fine adjustment, a slight turn this way, a slight turn that way. When the shadow's tip kisses the line, he holds it steady. He has just calibrated the device. Now one of the straight radial lines marked with a deeper, more confident notch is pointing directly to true north. The helmsman now has a physical visual reference. He can glance at the disc and ensure the bow of the ship remains at the correct angle to the north line. They have created a compass where none should exist. You are looking at a reconstruction of one of the most mysterious and ingenious pieces of Viking technology ever discovered, the uninterrupted disc. The story of this artifact is a perfect example of how our understanding of the past can change. In 1948, an archaeologist was excavating the ruins of an old Norse monastery on a fjord in Uninterrupted, Greenland. Among the rubble, he found a small fragment of a wooden disc with a series of carved notches around its edge. For over 50 years, it was a puzzle. It sat in a museum labeled as an unknown object. For half a century after its discovery, archaeologists debated the purpose of the uninterrupted disc. Was it merely a decorative object, a piece from an unknown board game, or was it, as a few suspected, a piece of advanced navigational technology far ahead of its time? The mystery remained unsolved until the early 2000s, when researchers began to re-examine it, not as a decorative piece, but as a scientific instrument. They realized that the strange curved line wasn't decoration, it was a mnemonic line. It is the path traced by the tip of a gnomon's shadow on a specific day of the year at a specific latitude. The genius of the uninterrupted disc is that it's a pre-calculated analog computer. Before his voyage, a navigator would have sat down and carved a disc with the correct shadow curve for the latitude he intended to sail along, and for the specific time of year, say the spring equinox. Out at sea on an overcast day, he could use his sunstone to find the sun, then use the sun's faint shadow to align his pre-carved disc. Once the shadow tip touches the line, the entire device is oriented, and he instantly knows the direction of true north. It is the perfect partner to the sunstone. The stone finds the hidden sun, and the disc uses that information to create a fully functional, albeit temporary, compass. Of course, the device had its limitations. A single disc would only be accurate for a specific band of latitude and a specific time of year, as the sun's path through the sky changes depending on your location and the season. An experienced navigator would have likely owned a set of these discs, or perhaps a single, more complex disc with multiple curves etched into it for different journeys. One for the summer voyage to Iceland, another for the spring trading run to England. This wasn't a magical one-size-fits-all solution. It was a system that required foresight, mathematical understanding, and careful preparation. It demonstrates a level of navigational sophistication that completely overturns the old image of Vikings as simple brutes who just pointed their ships and hoped for the best. They were scientists of the sea using elegant carved pieces of wood to solve complex problems of celestial mechanics. As the helmsman confidently adjusts his steering oar, glancing at the aligned disc, you realize you're witnessing a quiet triumph of geometry over the grey, formless chaos of the ocean. The afternoon wears on the grey, overcast sky, slowly thinning out. By the time the sun begins its final descent, the clouds have broken and the western horizon is a spectacular blaze of orange, pink, and deep purple. You watch as the sun, the hero of your daylight navigation, finally kisses the edge of the world and sinks below it, leaving a trail of fading color in its wake. A profound darkness settles over the sea, a darkness deeper than you have ever experienced. There are no city lights, no street lamps, nothing to pollute the sky. The sea and the sky merge into a single velvety blackness. A familiar chill returns to the air, and with the loss of the sun, a flicker of that old anxiety returns. Your primary guide is gone. Now what? You look over at the crew. They are completely unconcerned. Their work is done for the day, and a quiet, relaxed atmosphere settles over the ship. A small fire is carefully kindled in a sand-filled firebox in the center of the ship, providing a small bubble of warmth and flickering light. The men eat their evening meal of dried fish, their faces illuminated by the low flames. Their shift is over. They have handed over their guidance of the ship to a different set of celestial bodies. After your meal, one of the younger sailors, the boy you saw learning the coastline in Section 2, gestures for you to join him at the rail. He points up at the sky, and you gasp. The sky is not black. It is a riot of stars. Without the interference of modern light pollution, the Milky Way stretches overhead like a vast, shimmering river of diamonds. The sheer number of stars is overwhelming, dizzying. It's not a flat dome. It has depth and texture. The sailor lets you take it in for a moment, then he raises a hand and begins to connect the dots. The constellations he points out are not the ones you know. He shows you a great familiar grouping of 7 bright stars. You know it as the Big Dipper or the Plough. To him, it is Karlsvogn, the man's wagon, or Charles's wagon. He traces the shape of a large 4-wheeled cart with a long handle. It's a powerful, practical image, one that's easy to remember. Then he shows you the trick. He points to the 2 stars at the front of the wagon's box, the ones farthest from the handle. He calls them the pointer stars. With his finger, he draws an imaginary line from the bottom star through the top one and continues it out into a seemingly empty patch of sky. And right where he points there, it is a single, moderately bright star that seems to be all alone. It's not the brightest star in the sky, not by a long shot, but it has an air of quiet importance. This, he tells you, is the Lidar Stjärna, the leading star. It is the North Star. He explains that while all the other stars, even the great man's wagon, will wheel across the sky throughout the night, the leading star will remain fixed in its place. It is the linchpin of the heavens. To find it is to find north, an anchor point in the turning cosmos. The helmsman on duty for the night watch needs only to glance at this star to check his course. He also explains that the star isn't perfectly still. Due to a slow, long-term wobble in the Earth's axis called precession, the star we call Polaris was not as perfectly aligned with the celestial North Pole during the Viking Age as it is today. It would have traced a small circle in the sky. So they relied not just on the star itself, but on its relationship with other nearby stars, like Kochab in the Little Dipper. which they may have seen as guards circling the true pole. The goal was to find the center of that celestial rotation. While the stars were in constant motion, the center of their motion was not. Their star charts were also deeply woven into their mythology, which made them far easier to commit to memory. The sailor points to a brilliant blue-white star in another part of the sky. He tells you the story of Orvandil, a companion of the god Thor.
Thor was carrying Orvandil across a frozen river in a basket when one of the man's toes stuck out and got frostbite. Thor, ever the practical one, simply broke off the frozen toe and tossed it up into the sky, where it became that very star, Orvandil's Tar. You know this star as Rigel in the foot of Orion. To you it's part of a Greek hunter. To him it is a frostbitten toe. This is how they remembered the sky, as a grand, unfolding drama of gods and giants. As you stare up at the North Star, a thought occurs. Its height above the horizon seems constant. If you were to sail north, would it not get higher in the sky? And if you sailed south, would it not sink lower? Yes, the sailor confirms with a nod. This simple fact is the basis for determining latitude. Historians and astronomers debate how precisely a Viking navigator could determine his latitude at night. Could they measure the height of the North Star above the horizon with just their hands or a marked stick, and understand that this height directly corresponded to their latitude A? Handspan at arm's length covers a certain number of degrees. By measuring how many hands the North Star was above the horizon, they could have sailed west while keeping their latitude constant. We have no written proof they used this technique, but for a people so intimately familiar with the sky, it seems almost inconceivable that they would have missed such a vital and obvious clue. Looking up at the silent wheeling stars, you feel a sense of profound peace. The ship is in good hands, the universe has provided a map, and these men know exactly how to read it. The night wears on. The brilliant star-dusted sky you admired in Section 10 has gradually hazed over. A low, thick bank of clouds has moved in, swallowing the stars one by one, starting from the horizon and moving inwards.
The man's wagon is gone. The leading star is gone. The comforting celestial map has been rolled up and put away. You are once again shrouded in a profound, sightless dark. But the mood on the ship is not the desperate, anxious silence of the Havila. It's different. It's a quiet, focused anticipation. The helmsman still holds his course, guided now only by the feel of the wind and the long, deep swell of the ocean. Bjorn is awake, standing near the bow, and he gestures for you to join him. When you reach his side, he puts a finger to his lips, then points to his own ear. He wants you to listen. At first, all you can hear are the familiar sounds of the ship, the steady hiss of the water parting around the bow, the deep, resonant creak of the mast as it flexes under the strain of the sail, the rhythmic groan of the steering oar, the soft flapping of the woolen sail's edge when the wind lulls. It's a symphony you've become accustomed to the ship's own voice. You listen for a minute, then two, trying to understand what he wants you to hear. You hear nothing new. You look at him, a questioning look on your face, and he just shakes his head slightly and points to his ear again, more insistently this time. Listen deeper, his gesture says. Listen past the ship. So you close your eyes, shutting off your useless sense of sight, and you focus all of your being on the act of hearing. You filter out the creaks and the hisses. You push past the wind. You listen for something underneath it all. And then you hear it. It's incredibly faint, more of a feeling in your chest than a sound in your ears. It is a deep, low-frequency rhythm, a soft, almost subsonic thump, thump, thump. That seems to have no direction. It's the kind of sound you might ignore 1,000 times, dismissing it as the blood pulsing in your own ears. But it's too regular, too steady. As you continue to listen, you realize it's the bass line of a powerful, distant song. It is the sound of the ocean meeting an obstacle. It is the sound of long, silent, deep water swells which have traveled for hundreds of miles, finally rising up and crashing against a solid object. It is the sound of land. It's a sound that travels for astonishing distances over water, especially at night. There's a scientific reason for this. During a calm night, the air near the sea's surface is often cooler and denser than the air above it. This temperature inversion creates a channel that traps sound waves and causes them to bend downwards following the curve of the Earth. It's a natural acoustic duct that allows the low thrum of distant surf to travel for miles and miles far beyond the horizon. This technique is not speculation, it is a documented navigational skill. The ancient Icelandic Landnámabók, or the Book of Settlements, which chronicles the discovery and settling of Iceland, contains passages that describe sailors in thick fog or darkness navigating by the roar of the surf. They were using their ears to see. Bjorn cups a hand to his ear, turning his head slowly like a human radar dish. He is trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound, but he is also analyzing its quality. He explains in a low voice that different types of coastlines produce different sounds. A long, sloping, sandy beach creates a drawn-out, shushing sound, a gentle roar. A series of small rocky islands or skerries creates a more complex sound, a jumble of sharper cracks and hisses. And a sheer vertical cliff face produces a deep echoing boom that is unmistakable, a sound full of menace and warning. He thinks he hears the latter. Cliffs. It is a skill born of necessity and honed over a lifetime. To a modern person, it is almost a superpower. But for these men, it was just another sense to be used. Navigators and acousticians still debate the maximum distance at which surf could be reliably heard and interpreted. Was it a tool for the final 5 miles of a journey, a way to make a safe approach in the dark? Or could a keen-eared sailor, a true master of this craft, detect the faint signature of land from as far as 10 or even 20 miles away under perfect, still conditions? The answer is lost to time. But as you stand there on the bow, listening to that faint, ghostly drumming on the edge of hearing, you understand that their world was not a quieter place than ours, but a world to which they listened more carefully. They read the sky, they read the water, and in the deep of night, they read the air itself, decoding the messages carried on the wind. The sound is getting slightly, almost imperceptibly louder. You are getting closer. Section 12. The deep rhythmic booming you first heard in Section 11 is louder now, a constant, tangible presence. It is the sound of a powerful surf hitting a formidable coast. Dawn is approaching, but it brings no comfort. The darkness of night is simply being replaced by the familiar, sightless grey of a thick coastal fog. You are close, tantalizingly close, but you are still blind, and to make a wrong move now could be fatal, splintering the ship on a hidden rock. The sail has been lowered, and the men are at the oars, keeping the ship moving at a slow, cautious pace, holding a safe distance as they feel their way along the edge of the sound. It is a tense, delicate operation. While Bjorn is focused on the sounds ahead, another sailor, a quiet old man with eyes the color of the sea, itself is focused on the water right beside the ship. You recognize him as the one who sampled the seabed with the tallow-coated weight back in Section 2. He is a specialist in the immediate, the tangible. He takes a clean wooden bucket with a rope tied to its handle and with a practiced flick of the wrist, he tosses it over the side. It lands with a soft splash, fills with water, and he hauls it back up, his movements unhurried. The bucket is brimming with cold grey seawater. He brings it to his nose and sniffs it, his eyes closed in concentration like a wine connoisseur assessing a rare vintage. Then he dips a finger in, brings it to his tongue, and tastes. His expression is thoughtful, unreadable. He doesn't swallow, but after a moment he spits the water back into the sea. He gestures for you to try. Hesitantly, you dip your own finger into the bucket. The water is bitingly cold. You touch it to your tongue. It's salty. Of course it's salty. It tastes exactly like the ocean. You look at him confused, but he simply encourages you to take a little more to swish it around. You cup your hand, scoop a small amount, and follow his lead. You focus on the taste. It is overwhelmingly saline. Yes, but underneath that initial salty blast, there is something else, or rather a lack of something. It doesn't have the pure, sharp, almost metallic tang of the water from the deep ocean. It tastes softer, slightly diluted. It's an incredibly subtle difference, one you would never have noticed if you weren't concentrating with all your might. It tastes like the memory of fresh water. The old sailor nods, seeing the flicker of understanding in your eyes. He is practicing another ancient art of sensory navigation, reading the water's character. As you approach a large landmass, especially one with rivers and streams, the freshwater runoff flows out into the sea. Because fresh water is less dense than salt water, it doesn't immediately mix. Instead, it tends to form a thin layer, a freshwater lens, that floats on top of the heavier seawater. This lens can be pushed by currents and winds extending for miles out from a river mouth. To an experienced mariner with a discerning palate, this subtle shift in salinity is a massive clue. It tells him not only that land is near, but that it's a significant landmass, one capable of supporting freshwater ecosystems. It tells him he is approaching a potential source of life-giving water, a place to refill his casks, and not just a barren, waterless rock in the middle of the sea. This wasn't just a Viking trick. It was a fundamental piece of seamanship known to sailors all over the world. But it was part of a larger skill set of reading the water itself. The old sailor points over the side of the ship. You look down into the grey, churning water. He wants you to see its color. In the deep ocean, the water was a pure, sterile, almost violet blue. Here it is a murky, greenish grey. The color comes from sediment soil and sand washed out from rivers and from the billions of tiny phytoplankton that thrive in the nutrient-rich coastal waters. He then points to a small object floating nearby, a twig with a few dead leaves still attached. A moment later, another one. These are not objects from the sea. They are messengers from the land carried out on the tide. All of these clues taken together build a detailed picture in the mind of the navigator. The booming sound tells him there are cliffs. The diluted salinity tells him there is a river nearby. The greenish water and floating debris confirm it. He is building a map in his mind, a map made of sound, taste, and sight long before the land itself has been revealed. Of course, the reliability of such a subtle sense is open to question. Maritime historians and scientists have sometimes questioned just how far from a river mouth a sailor could reliably detect a change in salinity by taste alone. Was it a subtle art only possible within a mile or two of the source where the fresh water layer is thickest? Or could a truly discerning palate, a man who had tasted the waters of the North Atlantic his entire life, notice the difference 5 or even 10 miles out at sea? We will never know the limits of their perception. But as the old sailor empties the bucket and coils his rope, his quiet confidence is answer enough. He has tasted the land and he knows it is welcoming. The fog still holds you in its grip, but the blindness no longer feels absolute. You are surrounded by signs if you only know how to read them. The ship waits. It rides the gentle swells in the grey, foggy dawn, holding its position just beyond the range of the booming surf. The oarsmen rest their blades still in the water for a quick turn if needed. All the external clues have been gathered. The sound of cliffs, the taste of fresh water, the greenish hue of the sea. You know you are near a specific type of coast, but you don't know which coast. Is this the land you seek, or have you been blown miles off course and are now approaching a hostile or unknown shore? All the scientific tools, the sunstone, the compass disc are useless now. All the sensory data has been collected. The final piece of the puzzle is not external, but internal. It resides in the mind of one man. Bjorn stands at the bow, his back to the crew. He is not looking out into the fog. His eyes are half closed, his gaze turned inward. He is accessing a different kind of chart, one that cannot be unrolled, one that will never fade. He begins to speak, and his voice is different. It is not the clipped, commanding tone of a skipper, but a low, rhythmic, almost musical cadence. He is reciting. At first you think he is praying, or perhaps telling a story to calm his own nerves. But as you listen to the Old Norse words, you begin to pick out familiar terms. Words for cliff, for water, for rock, for island. He is describing a journey, and from the Sunstone Isles he chants his voice a low thrum. You sail for 2 days with the morning sun at your back. You will come to the place where the whale road tastes of fresh water and the sea turns the colour of moss. The sound of the surf there is the sound of a great drum, for the cliffs rise like a broken shield and the sea wind has no place to rest. His words are painting a picture, and it is a picture that matches the sounds and tastes you have just experienced. The taste of fresh water from section 12, the booming cliffs from section 11. It's all there in his story. He continues, his eyes still closed, a human search engine querying a vast internal database. 3 sea stacks stand guard, their tops white with the droppings of gannets. The tallest is shaped like the horn of a great aurochs. Pass these on your port side, and the current will try to pull you south, so you must row hard. Beyond the Horn Rock is the mouth of the fjord, and the water there is safe and deep. He is navigating not through space, but through memory. What you are hearing is a saga, but it's a specific kind of saga. It is a lead, a route, a set of directions passed down from his father and his father's father, a living map encoded in poetry and prose. In a world without widespread literacy, memory was the most vital tool of all. The Norse sagas were not just adventure stories about gods and heroes. They were libraries of cultural knowledge. They contained family histories, legal codes, and most importantly, for a seafaring people, detailed navigational information. The rhythm and poetic structure weren't just for entertainment. They were mnemonic devices, making these vast quantities of data easier to memorize, recall, and transmit accurately from one generation to the next. You are witnessing the power of a highly trained mind in an oral culture. Bjorn's brain is the hard drive, and this saga is the file he has just opened. The stories are filled with poetic metaphors called kennings, which pack a huge amount of information into a short phrase. A dangerous reef might be called the rib cage of the sea serpent. A safe harbour could be the alehouse of the wave horse being the ship. These weren't just flowery language, they were vivid, unforgettable images that stuck in the mind. A place named the Fjord of the Screaming Gulls is a far more memorable and useful landmark than a series of abstract coordinates. Of course, this system had its own potential flaws. Historians and anthropologists debate just how much a story might change as it was passed down through generations. Was this oral mapping system incredibly precise, with every detail preserved perfectly by the poetic structure and the solemn duty of the storyteller? Or did the stories become distorted over time, with storytellers adding their own embellishments, allowing legendary elements to creep in and obscure the practical life-saving details? Did the real 300-foot cliff eventually become a 1,000-foot fortress built by frost giants? It's a question we can never fully answer. But as Bjorn falls silent, his recitation complete, he opens his eyes. There is no doubt in them. He has found the right file. He has matched the sensory data to the story. He knows exactly where you are. The Horn Rock should be to the north, he says, his voice back to its normal commanding tone. We will hold here until the fog lifts. The ultimate navigation tool, it turns out, was not a crystal or a disc, but the carefully cultivated landscape of human memory. You sit in the damp, grey stillness, the ship rocking gently on the swells. The decision has been made. Bjorn knows where you are, and you are waiting for the world to reveal itself. There is a sense of calm, of control. The system has worked. The combination of technology, sensory perception, and deep ancestral memory has triumphed over the blind chaos of the sea. But in the quiet, you find your mind drifting. You look at the stoic, bearded faces around you, and you wonder about the other ships. The ones that didn't have a Bjorn. The ones whose sunstone was lost in a storm, whose navigator fell ill, whose memorized saga was flawed or forgotten. For every story of a successful voyage, there must be a dozen stories of failure, stories that were never told because no one survived to tell them. You are on a successful voyage, but now you confront the ghost of its alternative, the grim reality of what happens when all else fails. Imagine another ship not so different from this one. They too were caught in a fog, becoming Hafvilla, but the fog did not lift. For days they drifted. Their sunstone was useless against a sky so thick and dark that no polarized light could be found. Their helmsman tried to steer by the swell, but a shifting wind created a confused, choppy sea, making it impossible. The crew listened for the sound of surf, but heard nothing but the endless hiss of the waves against their own hull. They tasted the water daily, but it remained pure, sharp, and terrifyingly salty. They were in the deep ocean, and they were lost. The first thing to become a problem would be the water. The casks of fresh water are finite. The rationing would begin first with a grumble, then with a quiet dread. A cup a day, then half a cup. Thirst is a cruel master, a constant nagging ache in the back of the throat that blossoms into a fire in the belly. Hope would begin to sour into suspicion. Men who had been comrades would eye each other with distrust. Was someone stealing an extra mouthful of water? In the night, fights would break out over a dropped piece of hard bread. The skipper's authority, once absolute, would begin to fray. His recitation of the sagas, once a source of comfort, would sound hollow and meaningless. His memory map is useless if he has no idea where he is on it. The ship, once a proud vessel of exploration, becomes a floating prison. The world shrinks to the length of its 50 feet. Day after day of the same grey, featureless horizon, the psychological toll would be immense. The monotony, the hopelessness. Men would slip into a deep, silent despair, or worse, a kind of madness, shouting at the uncaring sky. The history of Viking exploration is written by the winners, but the margins were razor thin. Sometimes failure was not a slow descent into despair, but a sudden violent end in a storm. But often the greatest tragedies were these slow, quiet ones. The most poignant example of this is the fate of the Norse colony in Greenland. For nearly 500 years, a thriving European society existed on the southwestern coast of Greenland, sustained by a tenuous lifeline of ships making the perilous journey from Iceland and Norway. They used all the techniques you have witnessed. But as the climate began to cool in the 14th century, ushering in the Little Ice Age, the journey became harder. The sea ice became more prevalent, the fogs more persistent. The old reliable routes, the memorized lied, became less reliable. Ships were lost more frequently. Eventually, the voyages stopped altogether. The lifeline was cut. The Greenland colony was left completely isolated, and over the next century it slowly withered and died out its fate, a mystery until its abandoned ruins were discovered centuries later. It's a chilling reminder that even centuries of accumulated navigational knowledge was no match for a changing world. Of course, not all failures ended in tragedy. Sometimes getting hopelessly lost was a prelude to discovery. The sagas tell of a Viking named Gardar Svafarsson who was attempting to sail from Norway to the Hebrides in Scotland. A massive storm blew him far off course, pushing him deep into the unknown north. He was completely lost, but after the storm passed, he sighted land the coast of Iceland. An entire nation was settled because a ship got hopelessly lost. Luck, both good and bad, was perhaps the most powerful and unpredictable force of all. But as you sit there listening to the drip of water from the rigging, you feel a profound respect for the courage of these people. Historians debate what the most common point of failure was for a Viking voyage. Was it storms? Was it human error? Or was it the limits of their technology? In the end, it was likely all of the above. They sailed on a knife's edge between triumph and oblivion. Every successful landfall was a victory snatched from the jaws of a vast, indifferent ocean that was always waiting to claim them. You have been waiting for what feels like hours. The ship rocks in the grey limbo, a patient and silent vessel. The somber thoughts from Section 14 about the voyages that failed have left a chill in your soul, a deeper appreciation for the quiet confidence that radiates from Bjorn and his crew. They have done all they can. They have listened, tasted, and remembered. Now they trust their conclusions and wait for the world to prove them right. It is during this lull that a new sensation drifts to you, carried on a slight shift in the breeze. It is a change in the smell of the air. For weeks, your world has smelled of only three things: salt tar and damp wool. But this is something new. It is a faint, earthy scent. It is the smell of damp soil after rain, of decaying leaves on a forest floor, of moss growing on wet stone. It is the unmistakable, life-affirming perfume of land. You take a deeper breath and you can pass the scent further. There is a sharp, clean, resinous note of pine, the kind of smell that speaks of vast, ancient forests. A moment later, another more fleeting scent joins it. The smell of wood smoke. Faint, tantalizing, it is the smell of a hearth, of a cooking fire, of human settlement. This is the final, most intimate confirmation. You are not just approaching a random piece of rock. You are approaching a home. This is a well-established technique, the last in the sensory toolkit of the mariner. Sailors for millennia have known that land has a voice, a taste, and a scent. And this final clue is often the most welcome of all. For Arctic voyages, they even had ways of seeing land reflected in the sky, reading the white ice blink from the underside of clouds to find frozen shores, or the dark water sky to find open sea. Every environment had its own set of clues, its own language. And then, as if the world has decided that you have waited long enough, the fog begins to yield. It doesn't vanish all at once. It begins to thin, to shred, to lift in great silent banks. A patch of pale blue sky appears overhead. A single watery ray of sunlight breaks through, striking the sea and turning a patch of grey water to glittering silver. The effect is magical, as if the world is slowly being painted back into existence. As the mists recede, a dark shape begins to resolve itself out of the grey. At first, it's just a formless, darker mass, but as the fog continues to dissipate, details emerge. It is a coastline, a vast, towering line of sheer black cliffs, just as the sound had told you, just as the saga had described them. The cliffs rise like a broken shield, and then you see them. To the north, standing apart from the main cliff face, are three enormous pillars of rock, three sea stacks, their tops white with generations of nesting seabirds. And the tallest of them, you can't help but smile. It is shaped unmistakably like a great curved drinking horn. Every detail from Bjorn's memorized saga is there laid out before you, as if the story itself had willed it into being. The current, just as he predicted, is pulling the ship gently to the south. The water beneath you is a deep, murky green, the color of moss, from the iron-rich hills you cannot yet see. The entire crew is on their feet, but there is no cheering, no shouting. There is only a deep, collective sigh of relief, a quiet, profound satisfaction in a job well done. The enduring debate is no longer if the Vikings could navigate the open ocean, but how we should frame their genius. Was it a collection of individual tricks like the sunstone and birdwatching? Or should we see it as a single holistic system where mythology, memory science, and sensory perception were all seamlessly integrated into one powerful way of knowing the world? Looking at the Horn Rock, you know the answer. It was all one system, a beautiful, complex, and deeply human art. Bjorn gives the command. The oars are dipped into the water, and the ship begins to move, pulling with steady, confident strokes towards the dark mouth of the fjord, towards the smell of wood smoke, towards home. Your journey is over. The ship glides forward now, leaving the open ocean behind, the sound of the booming surf fading as you enter the calm, protected waters of the fjord. The steep cliffs on either side muffle the wind, and the water here is as smooth as dark glass, reflecting the newly cleared sky above. Your part in this journey is done. The tension of the voyage, the fear of the fog, the thrill of discovery, all of it can begin to soften now, its edges blurring as you drift into a well-deserved rest. The rhythmic splash of the oars is a steady, soothing beat, a gentle lullaby from another time pulling you deeper into tranquility. You can let go of the story now and just feel the gentle rocking of the ship, a cradle of wood on calm, quiet water, safe and secure. The air is still and the world is peaceful, and there is nothing left for you to do but to breathe in and to breathe out, to feel the wonderful, heavy feeling of sleep as it settles upon you, a soft, warm cloak in the quiet of the fjord. The journey is over. It is time to rest. End of script. Sweet dreams. Sweet